Welcome to About Acrobat Automation, where we'll take a high-level view of automating Acrobat to see what it's all about, and we'll also take a look at several real-world examples. But first, let's talk a little bit about Acrobat. In fact, this presentation is being displayed in Acrobat 10. I'll be using it to demonstrate some of the ideas presented here. Acrobat is, of course, one of the many software tools that is used to manage electronic documents. But Acrobat's role is not always obvious. Unlike many of the other software tools, such as Adobe InDesign or Microsoft's Word, Acrobat is not an authoring tool. We don't use it to create original content. Acrobat provides two other kinds of services for electronic documents: finishing or preparing documents for distribution and managing document workflows. Sometimes the difference between these two types of activities isn't obvious. Preparation involves tasks such as converting other file formats into PDF and then adding the finishing touches such as links, headers and footers, metadata, or whatever else is needed before the document is sent out to the users. Workflow is about processing documents, or another way to think about workflow is that it's about processing information. Information comes in from somewhere else. Acrobat performs a series of tasks on that information to create something new, and then that new thing is sent off somewhere else. There are many different kinds of workflows. Every business or organization has their own document or information workflows. But Acrobat comes built in with two general-purpose workflow processes. These are the form data handling and document review processes. I'm not here to talk about either of these, but let's take a quick look at the form data handling because it's going to help us to understand automation a little bit better. Form data handling is initiated from the Tools panel on the Forms pane with the Distribute button. Pressing this button initiates a complex process where several things happen. Some new features are added into the current PDF form. A new document is created, a special data collection document. Both the form and this data collection document are hooked into the form tracker, and then the forms are emailed out to a set of users. But the process doesn't end there. As forms are emailed back from the users, they are added into the collection document and logged into the forms tracker. There's an awful lot going on within this process. The vast majority of it is transparent to the user. The users don't see all the little things that are going on under the covers to make it all happen. All they see are the results. So this is in fact an automation workflow process, an automation process for managing the form data. This process works really well if your form's workflow fits into what it does. The problem, of course, is that we all have our own unique document and information processes. Our particular process might not fit into one of these two that are built into Acrobat. So to perform those kinds of activities that include not just data workflow, but also document preparation, we usually end up doing the individual tasks one at a time from the Acrobat menus and toolbar buttons. And that is where automation comes in. In a larger sense, automation is anything that simplifies all the tedious and repetitive stuff that we normally have to do with Acrobat. Automation can mean encapsulating a series of manual operations into a single step, applying a set of operations to multiple documents, or guiding the user through a set of complex actions. And sometimes it means combining all of these things. When we talk about automation, we are almost always talking about Acrobat Professional. Adobe Reader can be part of a document workflow process because there are some simple things that can be done with Reader. But for the most part, Reader simply doesn't have the capabilities to perform document preparation and workflow operations. It can be part of a process, but it is not used for the entire process. We use automation, of course, because there are a lot of advantages to it, and the most obvious of these is increased productivity. In some cases, this productivity increase is huge. Quite literally, hours of manual activity can be compressed into minutes or seconds with automation. You'd be surprised how much time is spent in Acrobat performing the same mindless tasks over and over. But there are other advantages that are just as important. For example, automation reduces or completely eliminates human error. When the user repeatedly performs the same task, they tend to add in variations. but an automation script will perform the same task exactly the same way every time. Automation scripts also hide the low-level details of a task. When a task is done manually, it has to be done by an expert, or at least someone that is trained and knows how to implement those details. In your office, you might only have one person who's qualified for this, but an automation script can make that task a one-step operation so that anyone in the office can do it with minimal training. I've had a lot of experience with automating Acrobat, and I know that within an organization there is often opposition to spending the time and energy to automate a process. But I've also seen that if even a single, very simple task is automated, that these advantages become immediately obvious, and then there's an appetite for more. There are a variety of ways to automate a process in Acrobat. Each has its own uses and costs. The two I'll be showing examples for are batch processing and JavaScript. Both of these are techniques that are immediately available to anyone with Acrobat Professional. The second two techniques require programming tools and a much higher skill level. Batch processing is a mechanism for applying a set of predefined commands to multiple PDFs. In Acrobat 10, this mechanism was renamed to Actions, and the user interface was also modified to make it easier to deal with. So, that's what I'll be calling it here, Actions. These commands are the same operations that are available from the Acrobat menus and toolbars. It's basically a way to create a macro of standard PDF operations. Actions are very easy to use and don't require any kind of special skills. JavaScript, on the other hand, takes a bit more effort and skill level to deal with. It's Acrobat's internal scripting language. In a way, it's very similar to Actions because there are JavaScript functions for most of the standard Acrobat menu items and toolbar buttons. But because JavaScript is a programming language, it's much more useful and it's more flexible than dealing with Actions. The only big drawback with JavaScript is that it's heavily sandboxed and has limited access to the user's file system. For the most part, JavaScript is about working only inside of Acrobat, as opposed to the Inter-Application Communication Interface, or IAC, which is a way for external applications to control Acrobat. It's less powerful than JavaScript, but because it runs from an external application, it gives the developer a way to access the entire operating system, all of those features that are built into the OS, and it does have access to the Acrobat JavaScript model. For example, you could write a Visual Basic application that opens PDF files through the IAC and then calls the JavaScript code that's needed to operate on those PDFs. This is a very powerful combination since JavaScript by itself doesn't have access to the user's file system and it doesn't have access to many of the other system-level services. The last item, plugins, are the most powerful way to automate Acrobat. Plugins are a software device that's tightly integrated into Acrobat and can do almost anything within the Acrobat environment and the user's system. But they are much more time-consuming and expensive to develop than any of these other solutions and require a much higher skill level. Here's a list of some of the most common operations that are automated. Document navigation, visual items like watermarks, headers, footers, and of course all of these features can be combined into a workflow or implemented as individual automations. There are workflow operations that can be automated, like extracting data from a PDF and then saving it to a database. There are many times when PDFs need to be analyzed to create a comment summary, for example, or a field summary. This is something that's needed during form development. And also, we can speed up our forms development by having automation scripts that add common features, like reset and submit buttons. Just about any operation that you do with Acrobat manually can be automated. This is just a very short list. JavaScript is by far the most important automation tool in Acrobat. As I mentioned earlier, it is limited because it's sandboxed, but it's also limited because it operates at a high level. It doesn't have access to the low-level PDF and Acrobat details. But despite these limitations, it is very fast and easy to develop, and it provides a very powerful set of functionality. Because of this, JavaScript is used everywhere in Acrobat and PDF. Most users are more familiar with how JavaScript is used in PDF forms, but for our purposes here, we're more interested in the other ways that it's used. For example, usually when we talk about automation with JavaScript, we're talking about a folder-level script, which is a bit like a plugin. But JavaScript can be used to perform automation tasks by direct execution from the console window, which gives us an immediate way to do a little bit of automation scripting. And it can also be used as part of an action, so we can combine those standard operations and actions with a custom operation in JavaScript. It can also be combined with the inter-application communication interface and even a plugin. There is a large variety of ways that JavaScript can be integrated into Acrobat, as all are part of an automation solution. So let's go ahead and take a look at a real-world example. I have a very simple one right here on my Help menu. These entries toward the bottom were all added with a folder-level script. These are all documents that I use frequently. The script that added these entries is trivial, but having them here saves me a huge amount of time when I need to use one of those documents. Here's another very simple example. When this document was converted to PDF, these URLs weren't converted to links. Notice that the cursor doesn't change when it passes over them. So, for a quick fix, I'll open up the JavaScript Console window by pressing Ctrl-J and enter this one line of code. It runs very quickly, and now this URL text is a link. And I can verify that by selecting the Select Object tool, which displays the outlines for those links. The console window is very handy for all kinds of these one-off tasks. For example, if I wanted to know how many form fields were on this document, I'd simply type in this.num fields. There are 4, and there are all kinds of these simple document analysis and manipulation tasks that can be done by typing in 1 or 2 lines of code from the console window. For most automation scripts, we're going to be doing something a little more complex. We'll be using folder-level scripts. Your basic folder-level automation script can be divided into 2 parts: the user interface and the business logic. The user interface is the buttons, menus, dialogues, and all those visual items that the user interacts with. The business logic is the code underneath all of that that does the real work. We don't want our business logic to have a user interface or any visual items necessarily. And it is important that these 2 parts are kept separate so that the business logic or parts of the business logic can be reused in different ways. I've designed and built many different automation tools, and I like to use toolbar buttons for the main UI because they're very visual and they're something that the users are very familiar with. Even if they've never used Acrobat, most people understand what a toolbar button is. In Acrobat 10, the JavaScript toolbar buttons appear on the Plugin Add-ons Tools pane. These buttons here were all created with JavaScript. Each one is an automation tool, and all of them can be downloaded at pdfscripting.com. This one, for example, creates a new blank PDF. I use blank PDFs a lot for testing. When I click on it, it displays a custom dialog for selecting the page size. This dialog, by the way, was also created with JavaScript. Dialogs are, of course, a great way to collect information from the user. Let's take a look at a much more complex dialog. This tool tiles pages. The dialog provides a way to enter all the different parameters that are needed to do that. And it even displays a simple preview of what the document is going to look like. These red outlines show how the pages will be tiled on a single sheet. Let's take a look at another kind of user interface. When I click on this tool, it displays a menu. Pop-up menus are a great way to give the user a selection of items. This particular tool is a menu of menus. It displays the underlying menu names for each menu within the Acrobat menu structure. Now let's take a look at a tool that's a little more complex. It's not more complex to the user. To them, it's just a tool that displays a user interface. But the business logic is much more complex. When I click on this button here, it displays a menu of company names. This tool is actually loading data from an external XML file. It then uses that data to populate this menu. When I select an item, the data associated with that item in the XML file is used to populate fields on the form. This particular tool will work in Acrobat Reader, Acroforms, and Lifecycle Forms. What we're looking at here is an invoice created from QuickBooks. The automation tool in this case is meant to grab information off of the invoice, which is in the PDF content, and then store that information somewhere else. For our purposes here, this is just a demonstration, so when I click on the toolbar button, the script examines the text on the page and then extracts important information such as the invoice number and the total amount. Notice that it's placed rectangles around the data that it extracted. It also placed red rectangles around the data that it used to find the extracted data. So there's a lot going on under the covers. Now, let's take a quick look at actions, or batch processing as it used to be called. In Acrobat 10, the actions are accessed from the Actions pane. I can run an existing action or create one of my own. This dialog lets me select which files the action will be run on, where those files will be saved, and the sequence of commands that will be performed on those files. Let's take a look at the commands. They're listed over here on the left side in each one of these panels. Notice that these are almost exactly the same operations that are available from the standard tools panes. But there are some differences, and one of these differences, down here on More Tools, is Executed JavaScript. I use this command a lot, combined with other commands to create automation scripts that I couldn't create with JavaScript alone. I'll exit out of these dialogues and show you one. This particular action, Find and Highlight Words, uses the redaction search command. It's shown here as search and remove text. This action doesn't actually perform a redaction, but it uses the redaction command to provide us with a very handy search tool. This search adds redaction annotations to the PDF. It doesn't actually do the redaction. These annotations are used for a different purpose in the following script. Very tricky, but when you're writing automation scripts, you have to be able to use these tools creatively to get the task done that you need. The script in this action converts the redaction annotations into highlights. Let's take a look at how it works. The first step is to select the file that the action will be applied to. We'll just use the current file. Next, it displays a pop-up that tells me what's going on and what I need to do. This is the redaction search dialog. I'll search for the word Acrobat. There, the action's been completed, and you can see that it found all the instances of Acrobat and then highlighted them. That was done, of course, in a two-step process where we used the redaction search and then converted those annotations. Each one of the tools that I've shown here provides us with the advantages that were outlined earlier. They improve performance over manually implementing the task, they reduce or eliminate human error, and they hide the details of the underlying process so that anyone can perform that task, in many cases from a single button click. So please, check out the automation scripts that are in the download section of this site.